then we shall see face to face. Now I know only in part. Then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. And now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, and the greatest of these is love. Here ends the reading. Thanks be to God. Will you pray with me? Loving and gracious God, we ask your blessing now upon us. Move through us with your love and your spirit and your grace, and help us to hear your word this day. For we ask this in the name of the one who came to show us your word, Jesus the Christ. Amen. Have you ever reread a book or rewatched a show and realized that a beloved character messed up? Maybe in a way that you missed on your first view, a way that wasn't obvious until you thought about it, and then you couldn't help but see it every time. That was my experience this week with Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof. I have loved both this character and this show since I was in high school and went to watch a fellow choir member's high school production of Fiddler way back in the spring of 1999. The great, catchy music and extraordinarily powerful story had me hooked. And the character of Tevye became one of my favorites. I loved, still love, his sincere, if at times irreverent, relationship to God. I know it's no great sin to be poor, but it's no great honor either. It's one of the best lines in the show. It is a relationship between Tevye and his God that is in the center of the show, in the center of what makes his character work. In fact, in regards to how he approaches prayer, praying with total emotional honesty to his Creator, I find him inspiring. And I've tried to emulate that in my own prayer life. So I was quite a bit shocked when working on this sermon to discover that at the end of the show, Tevye is wrong. And not just a little wrong, but big time wrong, massively wrong. At the climactic moment of the show, when it matters the most, Tevye messes up, leading to the tragic, sad ending of this otherwise mostly upbeat and buoyant show. And leading, it must admit, to a great deal of the power the show has. Allow me to back up. For those who perhaps have not seen the show or have not seen it for many, many years. Fair warning, I'm about to spoil the entire plot. So if you don't want that, you should probably close your ears, because there aren't many surprises left. Fiddler on the Roof is about an Orthodox Jew, Tevye the milkman, 3 of his 5 daughters, and the town of Anatevka. It introduces, at the very beginning, the idea that it is tradition that keeps the Jewish community of Anatevka going in the midst of a changing world, and in the midst of a world that really persecuted them and hated them, living as they did in the outskirts of the Russian territory. The show then proceeds to test just how far those traditions can stretch without breaking. In a community where marriages are usually arranged with the help of the local matchmaker, all 3 daughters stretch the marriage traditions. First, there is Zeitel and the local tailor who decide they want to get married, that they're in love, and come to Tevye asking him to arrange a marriage between them. In other words, to give them permission for what they actually want to do, but still trying to do it in the system. Later, there's Hadel, Tevye's second daughter, who gets engaged to the Marxist tutor Perchik and asks not for Tevye's permission, but his blessing. they were going to get married regardless, but still trying to do so in a way that wouldn't totally overturn the apple cart. A blessing Tevye gives to Huddle, even when the marriage forces her to move to Siberia to be near her beloved, who was arrested for being a Marxist. During each of these decisions, Tevye weighs the pros and the cons, deliberating just how far traditions can go by talking about the other hand. On the other hand, but on the other hand. But then there's Hava. Hava falls in love with and asks to marry a Russian Christian. She's refused and elopes anyway. And when she comes back to her father asking not for forgiveness but for understanding, Tevye decides that there is no other hand and turns his back on his daughter, treating her as if she were dead. It's extraordinarily powerful theater. If it's done well, it should bring tears to your eyes. But I'm not sure it's the right choice. In fact, I have been convinced that it is here, in this moment of the show, that Tevye messes up. I think that Tevye's traditions blinded him to the possibility that there might actually be yet another hand. After all, his decisions cost him his daughter, even as he reaffirms the decision of the consequence a couple times more before the end of the show. And while never portrayed as easy, in fact, quite the contrary, it's the hardest thing he does in the entire show, I cannot believe that the decision to turn your back on your child that you love is ever the right one. That's not how I perceive parenting, and it's not how I perceive Christianity. And here, I must admit that I'm perhaps being a little too hard on Tevye. After all, I have never been an Orthodox Jew, and I can't truly analyze or evaluate Tevye's decisions based upon his belief system and his morals, and it's probably unfair of me to even try. But what I can do, what I feel we must do as viewers of this show, is look at it from the perspective of what Christ calls us to do. And I am convinced that Christ calls us to go another way. That is the way of love and grace, of mercy and forgiveness. It is the way, to be concise, of Jesus. Our gospel reading this morning shows us a taste of what this might look like. The Pharisees, a too often demonized group in our Christian reading of these stories, is fighting again with Jesus. You see, Jesus has healed on the Sabbath, a time that is supposed to be set aside for absolutely no work. Indeed, good Orthodox Jews wouldn't even cook on the Sabbath, but they would pre-cook and pre-prepare that day's meals, so all they had to do was eat. That is their tradition, and more than that, it's one of the 10 Commandments. It's there on the tablets in Exodus 20. And yet, Jesus heals a woman, an action that could be taken as work, and they call out on it. It must be noted that, at least according to their traditions and to their laws, they're not wrong. Jesus seems to be violating what is an essential reality, an essential part of their culture, and as fellow religious leaders, they're almost honor-bound to question him about it, to ask him to explain himself, to ask him how he says that this action fits with these things they have been taught. There is no indication, at least in this story, that they act out of malice or jealousy or anything but a sincere difference of opinion about how best to apply the law and the traditions. For them, there is no other hand when it comes to the Sabbath. And they want to understand how Jesus can see differently. For Jesus does see the world and the traditions differently. For Jesus, helping another, caring for another is never work. And the rest that comes on the Sabbath is as much about human need as it is about honoring God. And Jesus sees both as important. But the rest of the Sabbath is not more important than caring for and serving those in need who come before you in Jesus' mind. And that's why he heals her. But it's not just that serving and helping come first for Jesus. It's love. Elsewhere in the Gospel of Luke and the other synoptic Gospels, Jesus is asked what the greatest commandments are, and he says there are two: to love God and to love neighbors. And that, I think, is what he was doing on that Sabbath day. He was loving his neighbor, this woman. He saw a need he could fill, and so out of the love he had for her, he filled it. No matter if it counted as work, no matter what the traditions of his day suggested, because love of neighbor was more important than anything else for Jesus. And so it should be for us. Or at least, I think it's how we're called to live, or to strive to live. We're called to love God with everything we have, our whole selves. And we're called to love our neighbors as ourselves. To love them, not because they're perfect or wonderful, or because they have perfected the religious laws and traditions of our faith, but because they, like we, are children of God. Because they are our neighbors, and we are called to offer them love and to act out of that same love. Even when it's hard, even when it goes against something else in our traditions, in our rules, in how we think we're living our lives. Because love is always meant to be at the center of what we do, no matter what. And that's where I believe Tevye messes up. He allows another tradition, not marrying outside the faith. An important one, certainly, for Jewish people, especially 100 years ago. But he allows that tradition to interfere with his love for his daughter. Tevye, like the Pharisees in our gospel reading, is unable to see the larger picture and the greater call. And the result is a tragedy for him and for his family. I can only dream of what the ending of the story might have looked like if Tevye had been able to choose love over tradition. Make no mistake, it still wouldn't have been a happy ending. The marriages, while the center of the show, are not the only drama in Fiddler on the Roof. But it would have been a story that had a great deal of hope in the midst of sorrow and grieving. Perhaps that's not realistic for Tevye, not the least of which is because he's a fictional character. But we can choose love. We can follow our traditions, do our best to think about just what it is our faith calls us to do and how our lives might reflect our walk with God. But we should always do so, remembering to love. And remembering that it is love and not our other traditions that are to be of the utmost importance to our walk as Christians. Friends, I hold the character of Tevye to you as a person of faith, from whom we can learn a great deal about our own faith walk. I'll even encourage you to consider his deep honesty and prayer life with his Creator as something we all could copy. But I implore you to not follow Tevye's example at the end of the show. Let us not place traditions and rules higher than our care for our fellow human beings. Let us instead choose love over everything else. Let's make love our tradition. Let's make love our story's ending. Amen. I invite you to join our sermon hymn for 581.